Hey, everybody, what's up out there? I hope you are enjoying these conversations as much as I am. It's so refreshing and so inspiring to hear such honest and thoughtful views on politics these days. It really does give you hope for the future. We have one more conversation, though, you're not going to want to miss. I want to turn now to an incredible group of journalists, people I am proud to call my colleagues out here in this journalism world. And we're also all MediaWise ambassadors, so go team MediaWise. We're going to dig in a little more to everything we just heard from Gen Z voters and first-time voters. Joining me now are three journalists who've been covering politics and the election on different platforms, and they can share what that's been like in this very strange, very difficult sometimes news cycle. They are Hari Srinivasan. He's my PBS friend and colleague who you saw earlier tonight teaching some media literacy skills. Hari, how are you doing, my friend?
Good. So far, so good.
So far, so good. All right. Savannah Sellers is also with us from NBC News. You saw her earlier, of course, talking to some of the first-time voters featured in this hour. Savannah, how are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here, and what a great last hour. Some amazing panels. Thanks for having me.
Truly. We're so glad you're here, too. And finally, a big welcome to Peter Hamby, host of Good Luck America on Snapchat. That's a docuseries about U.S. politics. Peter, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I've probably learned a lot more from everyone on the show than they will from me, but it's great to be here.
I know that quiz that Jayla was giving at the end. I was like, do I know the answers here? I'm not sure. Welcome to you all. Reminder to folks out there watching, join in the conversation, guys. Send us your questions. I'll put them to this fabulous round table and we'll get you some answers. But let's just start off. Savannah, kick us off here because you've been covering this election and politics. And I want to know, what are some of the stories about young voters in particular that you have your eye on, either ones that you don't think we're paying enough attention to or ones that you're excited to tell?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think first it just starts with what we've touched on a little bit in some of these panels. We were just hearing about this is the youth vote going to turn out? Will we see young people at the polls? We know this generation has been this activist generation. We know they have turned out for marches, for protests. Is that going to carry over to the polls? Will we actually see that number? We know 1 in 10 voters is a Gen Z voter. Are those 1 in 10 voters going to turn up? Are they going to be at the polls? Another thing that we have been keeping a close eye on at NBC News, and we've dedicated a lot of resources in general to climate change by creating what's called our climate unit. But leading up to this election, that's something really interesting to us with Gen Z, because we know that is something that is almost more generational than it is partisan when it comes to voting. And so with younger voters, a lot of first-time voters, that seems to be something that pretty much universally across the board, no matter where on the political spectrum a first-time voter might land, they do believe is happening, they believe it's man-made, and they believe something needs to be done about it. And we're looking to see what they do with their vote in that way.
Peter, what about you? How are you covering the election? I mean, we keep talking about election day being just a few weeks away, but the election is now. Millions of people have already voted. Voting's underway in most of the country. What are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, typically, I worked at CNN before this, and this is the 4th presidential election that I've covered. Typically, I would be in Ohio or Texas or, Atlanta right now talking to voters. And I think that is something, if you watch a lot of news right now, is being missed. I do think journalists are traveling more than they were at the height of the pandemic. But for me right now, I mean, I'm not traveling very much because typically I rely on a camera crew, and, there's some sensitivities with my crew about getting on airplanes and their health. So I'm actually doing a lot of remote interviews with politicians. We've interviewed Joe Biden and Anthony Fauci. We just interviewed Madison Cawthorn, who's a millennial Republican. He'd be the youngest member of Congress if he wins. He's 25 years old. Sort of doing that stuff on Zoom and figuring out a way to make it compelling by asking people questions that they're not typically getting asked by the mainstream media. Politicians right now have a lot of choice in the interviews that they agree to do. They have more power than they used to because they can create content for their own channels. And a lot of times that means they don't want to do your sort of typical cable news interview on CNN. But when I pitch them to come on my show, I tell them, hey, the audience here, it's a lot of first-time voters. The majority of them are under 25. We're going to talk to you about things that hopefully they care about. So I'm trying to use Snapchat to my advantage in that way to book big political guests.
That's such a good point, right? The access has changed completely during the pandemic, which makes it a lot harder sometimes to get answers straight from the politicians themselves. Hari, I'm going to put the first viewer question to you, though, because this falls directly into your wheelhouse. This comes from Chris. He's 21. He's from Wisconsin, and he's asking, what do you recommend people do to break out of their echo chambers when it comes to the media they consume? What do you recommend to Chris?
Well, that's a good question, Chris. I think one of the easiest, most passive ways is if you're on different social media platforms, whether it's Twitter or it's Snapchat or TikTok, follow people who you don't actually agree with just to see how they're thinking. I mean, it's incredibly passive. You don't have to have the subscription to every newspaper across the political spectrum. But if you're getting your information on different social platforms, that's actually a very easy way to do it. If it's not social media, then try watching a channel that your parents don't like on TV, right? So just to see why and how somebody sort of spins the same set of facts, right? So if you watch something like PBS or C-SPAN, or you just kind of you get the facts, you get, for example, like a congressional hearing, right? So you can go online and find the raw hearing on YouTube, and then you can kind of go to a couple of different channels and say, here's how they treated it, here's the spin that they put on it, here's their own flavoring. So just to try to get a little bit of an idea of how and why people think differently than you, that's a way to get out of your own bubble. And then the next time you meet somebody that doesn't think that way, it's easier for you to have a conversation with them.
I like how you're encouraging people to not listen to their parents. Watch things your parents don't watch. Don't listen to them right now. Peter, I want to come back to you for just a second, because this is a question I think all of us have gotten as journalists, which is about balancing how you feel in your own personal life and how you do your job. One of our viewers is asking, how difficult do you find it to separate your personal beliefs and political leanings when you're covering an election in particular? What do you have to say to that?
I mean, I think this plays a little bit off the previous question. I think it's important for journalists to get out of their own bubbles as well. And I think that as hard as it is to separate your personal opinions, once you get out of your geographic bubble, your cultural bubble, and your technological informational bubble, then you start to understand where other people are coming from, where their belief system comes from, how they process news and information. And again, I spend most of my career covering politics traveling outside of Washington, outside of New York. And I think I do have a little bit of an ear, for cultural viewpoints outside of that ecosystem. And once you start to think about the viewer on that end and how they're receiving you, I think that you're a little more able to sort of push down any of your personal beliefs. By the same token, I do think that consumers are smart, especially this generation. That this is a no BS generation. They understand that objectivity is not a real thing, that fairness is a real thing, and that if you are authentic, and sometimes if you're just upfront about where you're coming from, maybe even you're an ideological journalist, I think people appreciate that, because you're not putting on any kind of like fake airs that, I think are one reason a lot of people tune out the news sometimes.
Guys, we got some great questions coming in. I want to try to get to as many of these as we can. And Savannah, this is perfect for you. It's something you handle all the time at NBC News. The question is about breaking news, which feels like it happens every 10 or 15 minutes these days. But Cameron from California is 22, and he wants to know, how do you fact check in breaking news situations? What do you say to Cameron?
I say to Cameron, I'm very lucky that I work at NBC News, because we have a fantastic team who is very dedicated to that. But look, I mean, that's one of the tough things right now, especially when a lot of what we're hearing that is really the news is almost unbelievable. It just feels like we can barely keep up with exactly what is happening. And one thing after the next feels like, wow, I can't believe this is actually happening, even to us as journalists. It still feels that way for us, but that's what we are dedicated to, especially leading up to an election. I mean, we've done this at NBC News for every major event, every convention night, every debate, we're doing it. We'll be doing it on election night. We have a live fact check blog going on constantly at NBC News. We have dedicated teams that are just simply fact checkers, not simply, very it's a very complicated job, but meaning that's all that they are dedicated to. It's something that we are constantly getting, as we're on air and it's happening. Of course, it's difficult in a breaking news situation when you're live on the air, but that's when you've got to rely on your team. And I think to Peter's point just a minute ago of transparency and being authentic, sometimes it's like, this sounds pretty wild. We are confirming it right now. This is what NBC News knows. This is what we've heard from other outlets, but here's where we're at right now, kind of level setting in that way. But on election night, we do not call a state until we are absolutely sure we have what's called the decision desk, and no one's even allowed near the area. It's stanchioned off. Well, I guess that was in pre-COVID times. We'll see what it looks like now and how many people are physically in the building, but it is absolutely something that we are so dedicated to. And it takes a lot of manpower at NBC News.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, election night it's going to be all the more important on that one night. And Hari, I know this is not the first election night that you've covered, but folks want to know how you're preparing for this particular night. We mentioned at the top of the hour, it may not be like previous election nights. How are you getting ready?
Yeah, I think, I should be asking you that question because you're working Tuesdays and I'm not. But I think, look, part of it is contingency planning. I don't think that any of the other elections that I've ever been a part of have we had to think in this way about all of the possibilities and the eventualities when it comes to whether it's cyber attacks, whether our people that are in the field are actually safe and sound, because there is still a pandemic. Are they going to crowded areas? Are they quarantining? There's that kind of thought process. And there's also really preparing for, well, what about how do we set the expectation level for our audience to not have a decision at the end of the evening, right? Because we've essentially bred an expectation over the last 25, 30 years that we'd essentially have a pretty good idea by about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock who won. Well, if Pennsylvania and Michigan say, we're not going to have all our ballots counted by tonight, that's a guarantee. Well, what are you going to do, right? So at this point, how do we have that kind of a conversation? How do we even frame, if somebody tweets out, hey, this election is being stolen, and we say, so-and-so said that, well, are we already playing into a narrative because stolen implies that it was someone's possession to start with, right? So it's, things that I don't think I've ever prepared for this way.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I'd love to hear from each of you because we've heard from so many inspiring and thoughtful and informed and engaged and educated young voters out there. And I feel like Peter said, I learned a lot from them in the last hour, but I wonder if there's something you want to share with any of those first-time voters out there. I remember what it was like for the very first time to cast that ballot and what a big deal it felt like. I'd love for each of you to just share whatever you think it is they can use at this moment before they go participate in our democracy in this way. Peter, what do you say? Kick us off.
I forget who it was earlier, but there's been a lot of talk throughout this program about local elections. Yes, Joe Biden and Donald Trump will impact your lives. Yes, Congress will impact your lives. Some of the best journalists I know, some of the smartest people who work really started out by volunteering and working for local, statewide, even city council campaigns. Like, they are some of the smartest people in politics because they don't get sucked into the national news environment, and they maintain a little bit of a grassroots touch to their views on politics. They don't get sucked into the Twitter wars and the Beltway conversation. Anyway, I would encourage people to study up and down the ballot, and after the election, take this excitement, this energy, this anger, frankly, this passion that we've seen in the last 4 years, and start to think about other races that can have maybe more of an impact. There's county executive races and city council races and school board races wherever you live that will impact your lives and also represent, the future bench of political candidates in both parties.
Such good advice. Thank you. Any advice for the first-time voters out there?
Yeah, I would say that you've already demonstrated that you're aware of this if you participated in any of these panels or if you're watching right now, but that knowledge is power, especially right now, especially with as scary as this whole fake news underworld is. It's become mainstream. And not to also reiterate, don't necessarily listen to your parents, but do the research for yourself. Figure out what you care about. See where candidates stand on your issues, as Peter just said, both nationally, but also at the local level. You can figure out who you want to vote for if you dig in and look at get where they stand on the issues, and you're getting your information from reliable sources. And then I would also just say, don't be discouraged. I know there's a lot of negative talk right now about this election, about how it's going to go, how long it's going to last, how fair it's going to feel. No matter what, any of that, you are part of history by voting for the first time and by participating in this election. And that in and of itself is something to be excited by, and to definitely exercise that right.
I love that. I love that. You're part of history. Hari, I'll leave the last word to you. What's your advice?
I'd say vote early and in person if you can, mail only if you must. And then once you get that out of the way, I would really encourage you young, healthy, vibrant, amazing people to volunteer to be a poll worker, because there's a lot of, usually it's senior citizens that are doing this. And if you want to cut down on the long lines, help.
Help. It's as simple as that. We could all use that help. You guys are amazing. I'm so proud to call you colleagues out there, and I'll be following your work. I know everybody else will be too. A big, big thank you to Hari Srinivasan, Savannah Sellers, and Peter Hamby. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all of the participants over the last hour, everyone in the audience out there too. Thank you for joining us and for joining in the conversation. And of course, a very big thank you to our partner MediaWise and to Facebook for providing support for this town hall. Guys, thank you so, so much for joining us. I'm Amna Nawaz of the PBS NewsHour. It's been my honor and a lot of fun to hang out with you for the last hour. Please stay safe, please be well, and please vote. Have a good night.